Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a subject, the piece of history, really, that, well, let's just say a fair few in the British political and military establishment might wish we weren't.
That's probably fair to say. We're diving into the source material on the very tangled relationship between Great Britain and the beginnings of political Zionism. It's a history that's complex, sometimes brutal, and absolutely essential for understanding today.
You really can't overstate the polarization now, can you? The conflict in Gaza is, it feels like, the foremost moral issue for many globally. And the debate is fierce, assertions of an inviolable right to a homeland on one side.
And on the other, definitions of Israel as a racist colonial settler state driven by political Zionism. The language is stark.
And Britain's fingerprints are all over this history. The Balfour Declaration, the mandate that followed. Britain was intimately involved.
Absolutely. But the real puzzle for us today, the thing that really leaps out from the sources, is this striking modern paradox.
Right. It involves two very well-known retired British military figures, Colonel Richard Kemp and Rear Admiral Chris Parry. Our sources describe their stance towards modern Israel as, well, almost unquestioning allegiance.
Which is where the history becomes so crucial, because that allegiance stands in, shall we say, stark contrast to the historical reality of Zionist groups targeting and killing hundreds of British servicemen during the Mandate period.
It's incredible irony. How do we square that circle? Their modern support versus the deaths of their predecessors.
Exactly. We need to unpack that British Mandate era, roughly 1917 to 1948, to even begin to understand the present.
Okay, let's do that. Because it wasn't always conflict, was it? The relationship started quite differently.
That's right. Initially, there was significant cooperation. Britain was actively facilitating Jewish immigration into Palestine. And crucially, British forces worked with Jewish forces against Palestinian insurgencies.
Like the Arab Revolt, 1936 to 39.
Precisely. That's a key moment. You had Captain Ord Wingate, a British officer, setting up the Special Night Squads, the SNS. These combined British soldiers with the Jewish Supernumerary Police, the JSP.
So the British Army was essentially training the future Israeli military leadership.
In effect, yes. People like Moshe Dayan, Yigal Allon figures who became pioneers in the IDF, they were in the JSP, learning counterinsurgency from Wingate and the British. They learned the tactics, the methods, the ruthlessness required right there.
So they absorbed the blueprint for security operations directly from the British.
That's fascinating.
But that shared purpose didn't last. It fractured. As World War II approached, British policy did a complete U-turn, becoming much more anti-Zionist.
The 1939 White Paper, that was the big one, wasn't it? Aiming for an independent Palestine with an Arab majority, strictly limiting Jewish immigration.
A huge blow to Zionist ambitions, and it led to that incredibly revealing quote from David Ben-Gurion. He said something like, "We will fight with the British against Hitler as if there was no White Paper, and fight the White Paper as if there was no war." Wow. Talk about political pragmatism. Fighting alongside Britain against the Nazis while simultaneously planning to fight Britain over Palestine.
It shows where the absolute priority lay, establishing the state. But even that wasn't extreme enough for everyone.
You mean there were groups even further out?
Oh, yes. Look at Abraham Stern, the leader of Lehigh, or the Stern Gang, as the British called them. His commitment to the cause went into, well, truly dark territory.
Darker than fighting the British. What are we talking about here?
We're talking about actively seeking alliances with Britain's wartime enemies. Stern fundamentally rejected cooperation, even against Hitler. He saw Britain as the primary enemy.
So, who did he try to ally with?
According to the source material, documented proposals were sent first to Fascist Italy and then, incredibly, to Nazi Germany in 1941.
Wait, to the Nazis. What did the proposal say?
It offered Lehigh's cooperation, quote, to actively take part in the war on Germany's side, in return for German help in establishing a Jewish state in Palestine. The documents described the desired state as national and totalitarian.
That's staggering. A leader within the Zionist militant movement offering to fight with Nazi Germany against the British to establish a totalitarian Jewish state.
The documents are quite explicit. The main enemy was Britain. And that level of hostility just exploded once World War II was over.
So from 1945 onwards, the gloves were really off.
Completely. Zionist terrorism turned squarely against the British state. The final death toll cited in our sources is 748 British personnel security forces and civilians killed in Palestine during that period. 748.
And the methods used weren't just about numbers. They were designed to shock, to demoralize, weren't they?
Absolutely systematic and psychological. Think about the high-profile attacks. Lord Moyne, Britain's top official in the Middle East, assassinated by Lehi in Cairo in 44.
And then the King David Hotel bombing in 46. That was the Irgun, wasn't it? Led by Menachem Begin.
Yes. Begin masterminded it. They bombed the British administrative headquarters housed in the hotel. 91 people killed: British, Arab, Jewish civilians, and officials. A massive, devastating attack.
If that was aimed at disrupting the government, the murder of the two British sergeants in 1947 feels like something else entirely. Sergeants Martin and Pace.
That was pure psychological warfare. These were two Army intelligence NCOs kidnapped by the Irgun.
And what happened to them was just horrific.
They were hanged. But then the Irgun booby-trapped their bodies. When British soldiers cut them down, incendiary devices detonated, mutilating the corpses.
Hanged and then booby-trapped. It feels calculated not just to kill, but to utterly break the morale of the troops, to desecrate.
Precisely. And it worked, in a way. News of that specific act caused anti-Jewish riots back in Britain. It showed how the violence in Palestine was destabilizing things at home.
And the threat wasn't just in Palestine, was it? The sources mention the campaign reached Britain itself.
It absolutely did. MI5 files, detailed in the sources, revealed discovered plots to assassinate major British figures. We're talking highly placed political personalities, including Mr. Winston Churchill.
Churchill himself. Good heavens.
And it wasn't just him. In November 1946, security for the state opening of Parliament was massively increased because Lehi had issued direct threats against the Prime Minister Clement Attlee, Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin, the War Minister, and even Field Marshal Montgomery.
They were targeting the very top of the British state and military.
Bringing the war home, quite literally. There was also that plot to kill Lieutenant General Evelyn Barker back in England.
Ah, yes, he was the one who issued that controversial order after the King David Hotel bombing, wasn't he? Forbidding soldiers from socializing with Jews.
That's the one. He enraged Zionist groups. And remarkably, one of the people involved in planning his assassination attempt was Ezer Weizmann,
The future head of the Israeli Air Force, and later president of Israel.
the very same. They even planted actual bombs in London places like the Colonial Club, the Colonial Office. The aim was clear: make Britain feel unsafe, even at its heart.
And this campaign, this violence, it had support elsewhere.
Significant support, particularly in America. There's a quote from the Hollywood screenwriter Ben Hecht in May 1947 that's quite telling. He said American Jews, quote, make a little holiday in their hearts every time the British were attacked in Palestine.
Wow. That shows the depth of feeling, the anti-British sentiment driving this.
It does. And all of this violence, this history of targeted killing of British personnel, brings us right back to that modern paradox. Colonel Kemp, Rear Admiral Parry.
Highly decorated officers. Kemp served everywhere: Northern Ireland, Bosnia, Afghanistan. Now heads a group supporting Israeli soldiers. Parry, a Falklands veteran. And both, as the sources stress, offer steadfast, almost uncritical support for Israel's actions today.
And the irony peaks around Remembrance Day, doesn't it? In 2023, both were quite vocal, joining others in the media condemning pro-Gaza protests happening around that time as insensitive.
Kemp specifically criticized those protesting against Israel's defense of its people.
Right. But here's the thing. They seem to, well, conveniently forget. Remembrance Day commemorates British service personnel killed in conflict. That includes the 748 killed by Zionist groups in Palestine.
Killed by the direct predecessors of the state they now champion so strongly. It's as if that specific part of British military history, those specific deaths, have been erased from their narrative.
Utterly erased, it seems. And if you want another layer of irony, especially concerning Parry, think about the Falklands War.
He served in the Falklands. What's the connection?
During that war, Israel was actively helping Britain's enemy, Argentina.
Helping Argentina. How?
Supplying them with weapons, Skyhawk jets, crucial signals intelligence. And who was the Israeli prime minister overseeing the support against Britain?
Let me guess. Menachem Begin.
The very same. The former Irgun leader responsible for the King David Hotel bombing and the murder of those sergeants. His motivation. Widely seen as payback for British actions during the Mandate. Still fighting that war, in a sense.
So, the legacy of violence against the British military didn't just vanish in 1948. It continued, manifesting as support for Britain's enemy in a major conflict led by someone the British had branded a terrorist.
It's quite a thread, which makes the reaction of Kemp and Parry to the killings of the World Central KitchenAid workers in April 2024 even more stark.
Yes, let's look at that. 3 British ex-servicemen, James Kirby, James Henderson, John Chapman, killed delivering aid in Gaza. Targeted by an Israeli drone, multiple strikes on an agreed deconflicted route in clearly marked vehicles.
A horrific incident involving former British servicemen and the response from Kemp and Parry.
They essentially accepted the Israeli explanation. A tragic mistake. Parry went further, calling the explanation more than plausible and describing the forces the IDF were fighting as pretty subhuman, sub-state actors.
And Kemp's reaction was along the lines of, war is hell, war is complicated, which is true, of course, but it sidesteps the specifics of this particular attack.
Especially when you contrast it with Kemp's frequent assertion that the IDF is the world's most moral army. How does that claim hold up against the historical doctrine?
Well, the sources we looked at suggest a different picture. They cite, for instance, Ben-Gurion's own Independence War Diary, where he writes about the need to strike enemies mercilessly.
Including, and this is a direct quote, women and children included, otherwise the action is inefficient. That's chillingly clear.
It points to a doctrine where civilian harm isn't just collateral damage, but potentially part of the strategy. This thinking arguably informs later concepts like the Dahiya doctrine used in Lebanon, essentially, using massive disproportionate force against civilian areas as deterrence.
Or the idea of mowing the grass in Gaza, periodically degrading capabilities, both military and civilian, accepting the high humanitarian cost.
Exactly. And this pattern isn't new regarding Westerners either. Think back to 2003, the deaths of Rachel Corrie, the American activist, and Tom Herndal, the British student, both killed by Israeli forces while involved in non-violent activities during the occupation. Claims of accidental death were made then, too.
So there's a history there that challenges the most moral army narrative quite significantly.
And the views of Kemp and Parry seem very much in line with the current British political establishment, don't they?
It seems so. The sources note how many MPs belong to Friends of Israel lobby groups. And criticism of Israel from senior politicians, even after the WCK killings, was described as muted or non-existent.
It became a non-story remarkably quickly at the official level.
Which is striking when you compare it to how Britain reacted officially in the past. For example, in 1975, the government issued a formal diplomatic protest when Israel held a ceremony honoring the assassins of Lord Moyne.
They officially protested honoring the killers of Britain's envoy. And even as recently as 2006, you had 64 MPs signing a motion in Parliament condemning Israel for celebrating the 60th anniversary of the King David hotel bombing. An event, by the way, attended by Benjamin Netanyahu, who was finance minister then.
So there used to be official condemnation, parliamentary pushback against commemorating acts of terror committed against the British. That seems largely absent now.
It's a profound shift.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. We've traced a history where Zionist groups systematically targeted and killed hundreds of British soldiers and officials, where assassination plots reached Churchill and Montgomery, with a leader behind some of the worst attacks later armed Britain's enemy in the Falklands War.
And yet today, prominent retired military figures like Kemp and Parry offer seemingly unconditional support for the state born out of that violence. They honor Britain's war dead on Remembrance Day, but appear to have completely compartmentalized or ignored the specific history of those killed by the very movement whose inheritor state they now defend.
The sources point towards a kind of collective amnesia, perhaps, within parts of the British establishment. A willful forgetting.
That's certainly what the juxtaposition suggests. A profound forgetting, or at least a silencing, of that bloody chapter in Anglo-Zionist relations, allowing current political alignments to completely overshadow the deaths of British servicemen.
Which leads us to a final thought, a question really, for you, our listeners, to ponder. Considering this entire history, the violence, the assassinations, the bombings directed against the British state and its personnel over decades, why do you think Queen Elizabeth II, who was Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces for almost the entirety of Kemp's and Parry's service, why did she never once set foot in Israel during her more than 70 years on the throne? Something to think about. Join us next time for another deep dive.